Stay tuned for Healing Racism, a community dialogue, right here on WGBY. Next.
Healing Racism, a community dialogue, is brought to you by the contributing viewers of WGBY and by
the Beveridge Family Foundation.
Good evening and welcome to Healing Racism, a community dialogue, a special live discussion here on WGBY. I'm Tina Martin and I'll be your host for tonight. We hope for an open and honest discussion on race and race relations in our country. We invite you to join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter using the hashtag WGBY Dialogue. You can watch our live stream at youtube.com/WGBYTV. We will be taking some of your questions here, as well as questions from our studio audience behind us. They're fantastic. They're ready to engage in conversation. Let's start by introducing our panel for this evening. We have Bishop Talbert Swan. He is the president of the Springfield chapter of the NAACP. Lisa Bakowski is the principal of the Boland Elementary School, that's here in Springfield. Heshimi Moja is the co-facilitator of the Healing Racism Institute, Pioneer Valley. And David Woods is founder of the Leadership Pioneer Valley. Let's start our discussion with Waliska Luga de Jesus with the Healing Racism Institute, Pioneer Valley. Tell us a little bit, stand on up, tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing, because you're doing some really good work.
Thank you, Tina.
And I hold the mic, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm not used to that, but I will. So this is a full circle moment for us. The Healing Racism Institute has been around for almost 5 years, and we're really proud to say that we have engaged over 500 community members in over 17 sectors of the community, and over 170 agencies are part of this conversation. Our goal is to identify internalized racism, interpersonal racism, institutionalized racism, and structural racism, and help people engage in conversations to eliminate bias and discrimination. So I hope that people engage in this wonderful dialogue you're in with a great panel, amazing audience, and we really look forward to also the social media engagement.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome. So we'll start it off with you, Bishop Swan. Why do you think that race discussions are so difficult?
I think
or are they difficult?
They are extremely difficult, and I think that's part of the problem with really dealing with the issue of racism in America is the difficulty in having candid conversations. And usually when you begin to talk about racism, people's defenses go up. There are certain names and language that is involved in that discussion. And so when you talk about race, racism, bigotry, those are names and connotations people don't like associated with themselves. And so the defense mechanisms go up, and people are reluctant to have a real candid conversation about other person's experiences. And so I think conversations like what we're having today are important, and the only way you ever can really deal with a problem is to talk about it and to deal with it honestly. In order to fix it, you've got to face it, and I think that's what we're doing here.
And David Woods, do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, I really do, Tina. You know, I'm a white guy, 80 years old. I grew up in a segregated city of Baltimore back in the 40s and 50s. I didn't see a black person until I was at college. I mean, you know, 18, 19 years old. So, you know, I mean, over my lifetime since then, it's been a real journey for me to get to the point where I am now. And it was never easy, But I came to understand that the key to healing racism, to understanding each other, is to get to know each other, just to talk to each other, just to listen to each other, and build relationships, because everything is about relationships. So it is difficult, but it's possible.
And Lisa, as an educator, do you believe that it starts at a young age?
It absolutely starts at a young age, and I think that it's pervasive, so that it really should be taught or instilled in children in both the home and in the school settings. But once children advance in their age, it's a little more difficult to have that conversation. So I believe that beginning very early that you need to have the conversation about opening up, being a receptive listener, and learning about other people's experiences. Because as we say in Healing Racism, that is someone else's reality, and that's not for us to check. It's for us to listen to their reality and really empathize, empathize in a way where you don't make excuses or feel sorry, but you're understanding and you're opening up to someone else's world and reality.
So Heshima, she talked about trying to start people at a younger age, and obviously you're not dealing with people who are necessarily always younger. What is the strategy then when someone is a little older and it becomes something that, as the bishop said, people are defensive about?
Well, certainly dealing with adults and dealing in the Institute for the Healing of Racism, when we're dealing with the uncomfortable topic of race, Lisa touched on a point, and it's one of the tenets of the Institute, which is the ability to open up and experience the reality of other people, listening. And part of the way that this works in the Institute is that we engage in something called a dyad, where we give people opportunities to sit and listen and be engaged as listeners, not engaging in conversation or debate or any type of dialogue, but listening. And quite often, as Bishop Swan mentioned, as soon as we begin to talk about the idea of race, people's defenses go up and people want to somehow defend themselves because they don't want to be associated with bigotry or being a racist or having racist tendencies. So when we allow people to speak and we don't have the opportunity to respond right away, then we really are in a position where we can begin to hear, because we're practicing the art of silence and the art of deep listening, so that a person can begin to actually communicate their experience to us directly.
And now this is all about audience participation as well. So I'm actually going to throw a question to anyone who wants to come and talk with me. We elected the first African-American president in our country. Was that a good thing for race relations in our country or not so good thing? Does anybody? Let's see. This gentleman here. I'm going to have you come towards me and duck down just so you're not in the camera shot there. All right. Tell me your name and where you're from. And we're going to look at this camera so that everyone can see us at home.
David Andrews. I'm from Whately now, but I'm originally from Chicago. One more time. Sorry. Can you ask me?
So we elected our first African-American president. Has that been good or bad for race relations in our country?
In our country, yes and no. I can say yes because that's a history-changing moment, having an African-American president. But at the same time, for most black people, our situation didn't change. It wouldn't have made a difference who won that election, actually. So there's your yes and no.
There's your yes and no. Bishop Swan, do you agree as a president of the NAACP?
I agree that yes and no. I think it was significant in showing that progress had been made in America, where there were persons who never thought in their lifetime they would see an African-American sit in the Oval Office. And so for all of those pioneers who fought through the civil rights movements, for the named and unnamed individuals through the years who fought, that was a positive. But I think Barack Obama's election also woke up a racist underbelly in America. I think the crescendo of that is, and regardless of your political persuasion, this is just my thoughts, the crescendo of that was the election of Donald Trump. Donald Trump was the result of 8 years of blatant racism that was stirred up because America had the audacity to elect the first African-American president in the nation's history. That gave rise to the Tea Party. That gave rise to so many other racist elements that reared their ugly head in America. And now here we are sitting in this moment with marches larger than the inauguration happening the day after because of the racist element that has been awakened in America.
Lisa?
May I just say that for those of us that are doing some work with social justice, I think personally for myself, I hear more people say, well, does racism really exist because y'all just elected a black president? And that I've heard that so many times. Well, yes, I agree that it was a wonderful opportunity for us, but that is just a piece of it. And racism, unfortunately, is still rearing its ugly head everywhere. And so when you sit and have dialogues with people and let them know that although that was one part in time, I mean, the mass incarceration is still happening. I mean, every single day there are microaggressions being spewed in our country, in macroaggressions to that matter. So although it was one point in history, it hasn't made as big of an impact as I would have liked.
And from our audience, is there a date on the last conversation you had about race with a coworker or a family member that you found to be adversarial? I see some people shaking their heads. We're all family here. Does anyone want to say anything? Don't be shy. Don't be shy.
I'm not shy.
All right, come on, stand on up. And I hold the mic. Yes.
You told me that.
You got it. And just tell me your name and where you're from, and we're looking at this camera.
Hi, my name is Willette Johnson, and I live locally here. I've lived here for over 40 years. I'm a retired educator, and I've had an opportunity to be a part of Healing Racism for some time, to my pleasure. I have not had a conversation lately whereby I felt some discomfort, or the individual felt some discomfort as a result of having to talk about racism. But through my career with the school district where I worked, it was ongoing, daily. And having had the pleasure to serve as the first African-American principal of a high school, I had to answer all the questions about Black people all the time. And so I did want to say today that I had an opportunity to be a part of a workshop at one of the local colleges, and they're beginning to talk about ally development. Once people are introduced to racism and identified as such, how do you now develop people who can come in and help them to learn how to say, or not to say, oh, I don't see color, or things that have for years been, almost ridiculous. And so I think I like this ally development. And what will the work be in terms of healing racism and other organizations within this community and nationally that help people to be able to talk to people? And as we've identified racisms, and they talked about intersectionality, all the other isms, and what do I say if I'm a person who's healed and now I want to bring somebody else on board? Would I just drag them, or is there a process for bringing other people on board?
Excellent. Thank you very much. David Woods, I actually want to ask you, because we're talking about race and racism, how do you define racism?
I think that's a good question. Racism to me means a lack of understanding of a person who is different from me, and fear and suspicion as a result of that, and an attitude towards them then of separateness, pushing them away, not wanting to build that relationship. I mean, I really think that, having grown up as a racist, and I readily admit that, in a segregated town of Baltimore, Maryland.
Now, were you a racist, or were you just in a segregated town? Because I think those are two different things, aren't they?
No.
Oh, okay.
Not in Baltimore, they weren't.
Okay, okay.
Maybe someplace else, but not there, they weren't.
Okay.
Now I forgot where I was going with that, but no, I remember now. But it was fear that was at the heart of that. I mean, who is this black person, and what are they going to do, and what about them? And the only way to get over that, people can talk to me all day long about, as my mother always did. She was wonderful, but until you engage in a conversation, until you try to build a relationship, and you got to do that deliberately. I mean, you got to be very intentional about building relationships across racial lines, whether it's African American or Latino or Asian or whatever it might happen to be. But until you do that, you're never going to get over that fear.
Lisa?
You could see my
yes, I can see
jitteriness.
You chomping at the bit.
So I'm going to readily admit, racism is a disease of the white people. It's a disease that is inherent in folks who are in perceived control, which in this country it's those that are white. It's not a disease of people of brown and black skin. It's our issue. We're the ones that have the racist and racism epidemic in this country. And I think that was the only thing I wanted to add to Mr. Woods is that, that is endemic in the white population.
And now, just before I go to you, I just want to say to the folks at home who are following us on Facebook and Twitter, please feel free to send us messages, questions. We want you to engage with us. This is our special here on WGBY, so certainly send us messages with that hashtag, and we will be sure to try to address your question here. Go ahead.
Sure. So I just want to mention that because these topics are so uncomfortable, people tend to dance around the issues. When we talk about racism in America, Bishop Swan brought up the idea that, brought up the point that the election of Barack Obama also brought about a great deal of backlash and awakened in many people, or brought to the forefront the racist tendencies that, and the underbelly, or the undertone, I believe is the word you used, Bishop, brought it to the forefront. The reality is that, today it's kind of ironic. We're celebrating today the 146th birthday, or what would be the 146th birthday of W.E. Du Bois, who said that the problem of the 20th century was the color line. And now, in the 21st century, we still deal with the idea of the color line, because when we deal with race in America, nobody wants to admit that the institutions, that the structures in our country are developed, they're woven together with a fabric of racism. Racism, there's a simple definition, it's a simple equation, and that's prejudice plus power equals racism. So the idea that our prejudices, which come from our perception of other people, and our perceptions are born through our five senses, and they're born through our experiences. So if, for instance, you have the experience like David of growing up in a segregated town where you pretty much deal with everybody who looks like you go to church with people that look like you go to work with people that look like you, there's no reason for you to have any inkling in your mind, any thought that there's something in your thought process that's prejudiced. But when people begin to interact, because of the way that we're conditioned, the racialized thinking in America that is a part of the fabric of all of our institutions, whether we're dealing with churches, whether we're dealing with, of course, Malcolm X said that the most segregated hour in America is Sunday morning at high noon, right? So people who profess the same faith but run off into separate corners to practice their faith. The educational institutions, the lack of access to black and brown people in America, to housing, to loans, to education. Those types of things are woven into the fabric of our country. So when someone comes into our circle that doesn't look like us, that doesn't think like us, automatically something is sparked in us, that feeling of fear that David mentioned, and that fear causes us to react in a way that, if it's not checked in its early phases, in its early stages, can develop into the type of actions that we see now in our country. The rise in hate crimes since the election, the policies that are now being put into place by our government, because these things are not new. They're woven into the fabric of our country. People think they're new. What Donald Trump is doing is not new. This is something that has existed since the country was born. He's only a manifestation or a representation of some thinking that exists in the lifeblood of the country. And he has become a voice that's emboldened people to act in a particular way. He's given them license to act in the way that they act or to speak the way that they speak. They wouldn't have dared prior to the election of our president. So these conversations are so uncomfortable that we skate around. And we never want to face these conversations because there are a whole bunch of stigmas that go along with facing the reality of our country. We don't want to be called unpatriotic when we question the country. We don't want to be called unspiritual or unreligious if we question because our religious institutions have taught us not to question. So the fact that we question makes people uncomfortable and we run off into our silos. So that's why the problem of the 21st century is still the color line, because if I find out I have a sickness in my body and I continue to refuse to deal with the sickness in my body, eventually my body is going to tell me, you have no choice but to deal with it because I'm going to get knocked out, I'm going to end up in the hospital. And America has come to the point where we have no choice but to deal with because we've come back around to a...
Reverend Swan, how do you feel about dealing with it? Not to cut you off, but
Sure.
It is something you have to deal with, but how do you deal with it? Because, you know, we're learning that it's ingrained into the fabric of the country. So how do you unravel that? How do you?
Well, some structures have to really be, you know, rebuilt. I mean, the reality is, and he was so accurate in saying that it's in the lifeblood of America. And so when you have something like a Barack Obama elected president or a Deval Patrick elected governor here in Massachusetts, and people point to, look, there are black people that are being elected. There are blacks who are now the heads and CEOs of this and that. That means racism has dissipated. Well, taking a black person and putting them in an institution that is racist does not reduce racism. They yet and still have to deal in that environment that has not changed simply because there's a black face there. It's no more than what we see in our police departments. Hiring more black cops does not deal with systemic racism within law enforcement. And so you have to look at the institution itself and analyze that and what are the racist elements in this institution and what needs to be rebuilt, because simply, you know, putting lipstick on a pig doesn't mean it's not a pig anymore.
Right. Now, I see people nodding their heads in our audience. Does anyone want to share anything? I'm going to come over to you. So keep talking, Reverend Bishop Swan.
Yeah, so I think what's important is that just the fact that we can still be here in 2017 in the 21st century, 100 years after W.E.B. Du Bois declared that the problem is the color line, and incidentally, his name is spelled D-U-B-O-I-S. I know that we have a problem spelling with the Department of Education. But the fact that we're still having black first in 2017 speaks to the fact that racism is yet and still ingrained in these systems throughout America.
Tina, can I make a comment on what he just said, because
Sure.
it'll be very quick. Be very quick. Bishop Swan said to me several years ago, he said, David, we both live in a white world, but you're a white man and you wake up in that world. I'm a black man and I wake up in that white world. And that makes all the difference. And it was one of the most profound things anybody has ever said to me. So
I tend to be that way.
He's also very modest about it. You've noticed that?
All right, tell us your name and where you're from.
My name is Tahira Amatul-Wadud. I'm from Springfield, Massachusetts, so right around here.
Okay, and when I asked if anyone had a comment, you said you wanted to speak. So
yes, I wanted to talk about the question you had asked earlier about the impact of a Barack Obama presidency, and listening to our panelists discuss what that was like. I'd like to just respond by saying that one of the last Facebook messages that I posted before the election, or the inauguration, I should say, of Donald Trump, was that as an African-American Muslim woman, trifecta here, I have known countless people who've been invited to the White House, myself included. I didn't know that before. And I wondered on his way out if we would appreciate that he opened that White House up to people like me, and would our incoming president be as open and inclusive? And that was sort of my closing statement on Barack Obama's presidency. And I sincerely mean that it wasn't a black White House, it was an inclusive White House, whereby now people like me and others who are interested in these issues, whether it's racism, sexism, religious issues, now feel, because of those 8 years of empowerment, that when we're faced with this sort of what we're feeling is this tone of intolerance coming from the White House now we feel empowered after 8 years of training to resist that. So I think that Barack Obama's presidency did change race relations in a way, and he did some 11th hour things that I think were sending messages of support to us to not despair and to keep pushing back.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Where do you want me to go?
We're going to go right here, sir. And
Yeah.
I'm going to have you tell me your name and where you're from.
Paul Robbins. I live in Wilbraham. And I think David can relate to this, and I'd like to kind of amplify something he said. You had asked earlier if people have uncomfortable conversations about race. And if you're a white male, it devolves into an uncomfortable conversation fairly quickly when you're talking to other white males. And
why is that?
Well, what happens is because it's a toxic issue. And to go back to what Reverend Swan said, people don't want to be identified that way. So
Even amongst white men?
Sure. And the way it kind of plays itself out is if you bring the issue up and you want to have a dialogue with someone who's another white male, it quickly devolves into it starts with if they would only pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Our folks came over from wherever it was. They don't seem to value education. So the way I decode that for myself is how racism finds itself into kind of the white consciousness is that whites have an inherent feeling of superiority over people of color. So you're not going to say that to anybody, right, in a civilized world. You're going to indicate it by saying they don't do this, this, and this. So
blaming, essentially.
Sure, and not recognizing, the equality that's basic in human life. So when you have a conversation with another white person, it's very difficult because usually, there's other people like David who, is on the journey with a lot of us. But the reality is it does devolve fairly quickly, and you get to that base. So the last thing I would say is that, to me, that was the underpinning of how people felt about Barack Obama. Why would the Republicans for 8 years not work with him? Why would people feel so visceral about him? And some of it was illogical. So it goes back to this, what I feel like we have to work on as a white person, is this inherent sense of superiority we feel over people of color.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your comments. Bishop Swan, you look like you wanted to respond to that.
Well, I think Paul hit the nail on the head. When you talk about going back to Barack Obama, here you have an Ivy League educated Harvard graduate, head of the Harvard Law Review, someone who married his college sweetheart, was an excellent father, no scandal around him whatsoever. He did everything according to how the average white man says you're supposed to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and yet somehow he still wasn't good enough. And yet and still, whenever you had a conversation about why there was this heavy opposition to Barack Obama, it always devolved into this conversation about policies. And then when you delve deeper into that conversation, they didn't know what half his policies were. And when you talked about Obamacare, they didn't know that it was the same thing as the Affordable Care Act. And so, what they would never admit is my opposition to Barack Obama is because he's a black man. And then there's that flipping of the script, that whenever you identify these racist tendencies, then you become the racist for having the audacity to bring up the discussion of racism. It boggles my mind how many times I'm called a racist, and I'm like, really, me? And
just because you're discussing it.
Exactly, because you bring up the topic or you identify what's happening in America and are trying to have a candid conversation about it. It's a way of being very dismissive and not dealing with the issue.
And we're actually going to appeal again for folks who are at home, who are watching us at home, who are on social media, who are on Facebook. Certainly send in your questions, send in your concerns. We definitely want to talk to you. We want to engage you in this conversation. So please do that at hashtag WGBY Dialogue. We're going to, I'm just going to start picking you guys out because everybody is so shy. Everyone's shy here.
I know many of these folks.
You know them?
Not really. They're not shy like that.
We're going to start pulling these folks out. Sure. All right. We have someone over here. Here I come. Hello. How are you?
Great, thanks.
All right. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And tell me your name.
I'm Steve Abdow. I'm from Amherst.
Excellent.
And I just want to jump on to this white men speaking about our experience and affirm Paul's statement that it's hard to talk with other white men about this. I think that the difference for me at this point, for first things, the couple of concepts of institutional racism and white privilege are real hot buttons for white folks who don't understand really what those mean. They become, in these words become, mocked as PC or as some kind of, they're very, it's very heated right now. And I just want to make a pitch for my transformation, having participated in the Healing Racism workshops, that I had no idea. And it was that understanding of my privilege, which I totally took for granted. I mean, I thought, I'm a little ethnic, believe it or not. I thought I had something to think. Then I realized, oh my gosh, I can leave that behind me. And the other thing is about the concepts of institutional racism, how valid they are. And it's about the education process leading to understanding. And I'm really interested in how somebody like me can help to educate my white male brothers about this.
So does anybody have any strategies on that?
Well, if I could comment real quickly, thank you for that point. So the idea of white privilege is a hot point. It's a touchy point for a lot of people, particularly when you start dealing with the narrative in America. When we talk about race, people like to say oftentimes now that the issue now in America is not race but economics, right? So when you start dealing with white folks in the lower economic bracket, usually the response when you talk about white privilege is, well, what privilege do I have? I'm poor. America never gave me anything. White privilege is something that people don't ask for. You're not given white privilege because you're worthy of it. It's not a merit scholarship, right? You don't get to join the club just because. You are born in this country because of the way that this country is set up and the idea of racecraft in America, which I can't really talk about now because I wouldn't have enough time. But you're born with white privilege. The second that you walk out the door. Listen, the reality is that I'm Heshimi and I walk down the street. If I'm walking down the street with Bishop Swan and I have the same suit on, he was nice enough to take me to the same place where he buys all those sharp suits, and I get to walk down dressed exactly. And if I'm walking down the street with Bishop Swan and I have the same suit on and we're engaged in a conversation, the reality is that the way that white privilege works in America, if a police officer comes near us, that police officer is probably going to ask Bishop Swan what he's doing walking through the neighborhood. He's not going to question me. Just by the simple fact that my skin is a different color than Bishop Swan's. He's going to get questioned about whether he has a right to be in a neighborhood. There was an instance, and I'll give you a scenario.
We're going to get right back to you. We just got to let this gentleman. We got to let the audience participate. That's what this is all about.
Every time it gets uncomfortable, they want to cut me off.
I'm sorry. All right. So tell me your name again. You're just look at me. Never mind them. No, I'm kidding. Tell me your name again.
David Andrews.
Okay. And I know you wanted to answer something specific.
It was more so a continuation of the conversation. I recently had the pleasure to watch 13th, and
Tell folks at home who may not know what that is.
okay, it's a Netflix, I guess you can call it a documentary. It's about the 13th Amendment, which was craftily installed into law. And what it breaks down basically is the birth of that racist fear that we have. And that was in that film of Birth of a Nation. If you've seen this film, if you haven't, see it. If you have, see it again. It was installed into white people, black people, all people that saw this particular film, that black men were only out to rape white women. They had this woman sitting on a cliff and the black man coming up acting.
We're not going to get into that many details, but okay.
That underlying installment of that fear of us is still in effect, as everybody on the panel said. It's still in effect, and until we can actually face that privilege that whites have, nothing's going to change. Even that fear that blacks have. There's places I'm sure in Springfield and where I'm actually originally from, in Chicago, where you see some brothers coming down the street, you're going to cross the street. And that's everywhere. And until we can actually face that and get that fear under 6 feet, again, nothing.
Keep going.
It's just going to keep going.
And now I wanted to hear from, you have your hand up and you're exactly who I was looking for. So keep your duck down and come over and talk to me. Because we actually want to hear from white women. We talked to white men about white privilege. How do you perceive white privilege? Or do you perceive it?
Well, what I wanted to talk about actually was history, because the United States is one of the most ahistorical places in the world. And the history of our racism is born of slavery and colonialism as well when it applies to Latinos, but also Africans. And we are not genetically racist. I don't believe, I think we notice differences among each other. But it was the power given to white people, and also the intertwining of sexuality and oppression of women, too, in relations to slaves and then to through Jim Crow. And all the violence that so far beyond microaggressions. This was brutality that was inflicted on African people in order that whites, particularly in the South, but all over this country, could profit. And I think that one of the ways of understanding our relationships to each other today is to understand where we came from.
History.
And I think that our schools need to be better, and maybe are getting better.
Well, I'm actually gonna ask Lisa that. Talk to us about what you are doing to address what she's talking about. Thank you very much.
Actually, if I could for a second give the white woman definition, white privilege. I think the question was like, what do we do to kind of call people's attention to it? I'm just going to reiterate from earlier is that we really need to be open and listen to conversation and listen to people's reality. I've been an educator in Springfield, I hate to say this, 27 years. That hurt. 27 years, and I have students that are now in their 30s who are still contacting me, and some of the stories that they're telling me of their reality, it's inexcusable. Me as a mom of 2 teenage boys who are white will never be pulled over on the street because They will never be stopped on the street because, well, maybe they will now that I've said this. No, but they will not because of the way they look, okay? They're light-haired, light-skinned. That's white privilege. My kids can drive a car. My kids can walk to the store, and they're not going to be stopped. That's not at all the reality of a lot of these young men. And I hear from them still constantly about the way that they're treated. As far as yes.
Get to we have one social media comment, so we want to get to that real quick, and then I'll come back to you. Karen on Facebook says, the white community needs to have honest conversation about how we benefit from white supremacy and be willing to leverage our privilege for the common good. That's easier said than done. Bishop, is that possible? We'll start with you.
Well, I think she hits on a point, and it really goes back to what many of the panelists have been discussing. My brother was talking about if we were going down the street together, and how white privilege would mean that he would not be accosted in the same way that I may be. We saw an example not too long ago where kids in a town in Texas were accosted by a police officer, and the whole thing got caught on film. You know how it got caught on film? One of the white kids that was with them could stand there and tape the whole thing, and the police never even bothered him. It was like he wasn't even there. That's white privilege. White privilege is the fact that that Dave and some of my other white brothers in here would never, ever have to sit down with their sons and have a conversation about how not to get killed by police, like I have had with my 9-year-old and my 16-year-old. That's privilege. It's not about necessarily that you're getting anything. It's about what is, because you are white, and what's inherent in whiteness is we're not going to suspect you. We're not going to treat you a certain kind of way. And I think that it should be leveraged to further the conversation in terms of racism in America. And I think what Paul and what Steve and others are talking about, being able to talk to other white folks about it, is very important. I'll give you this one final point on that. I do a lecture series every year, and this is a shameless plug. Shameless plug. And we get good audiences that come out all the time. But my final speaker this year is Tim Wise. And Tim will tell you, when he comes, the house will be packed with standing room only. But he'll tell you it's a shame that all of the white folks come to the lecture when the white man comes to talk to them about these issues, and they won't step foot in when black folks who actually have experienced it and lived it come to have that conversation.
And so I'm going to pose this to the audience. If I have a privilege, right, if membership is a privilege for me, why would I give it up? Why would I try to leverage it for someone else? I see you nodding your head. Come talk to me. Sir? Yes, you, either one of you. Come talk to me. So why would someone leverage their privilege? Let's look at this camera here. As the person asked on Facebook, why would you leverage that? It's hard to do, I would think.
Well, first of all, my name's Mari Castañeda. Yep, and I'm from Amherst, and and I teach at the university. And one of the things that I talk to my students is about, how do we think about all of us working together in a collaborative space, and the fact that if we're moving our society forward, and if we're thinking about all of us having access to the kind of resources that we all want to have in order to develop the kind of rich life that we all feel entitled to be able to have, why not sort of check ourselves to be able to say and to think about how can we all have access to that? Simply because we spread the resources, does that mean that less people have access to it? Not necessarily. And so, really having, for instance, my students really think about how do we create sort of larger communities that everyone could be included, I think is a very difficult conversation, just because a lot of them have said, does that mean I get less? Well, I get less because we're including more Latinos, African Americans, Asian Americans in the process. And I tell them, no, I do not believe that you will simply get less, because we all benefit when everyone gets to be included, in access to resources, to education, and so forth. But I think that that's a really hard thing to really get folks to understand.
Thank you very much. Sir, we're going to have you come step over here. Yes. Thank you. Come talk to me. So privilege, it's hard to leverage or hard to give away.
Yes, my name's Elliot.
Elliot, nice to meet you, Elliot. Thanks for joining us.
And I'm also an educator.
Excellent.
And I think a big turning point for discussions, especially my predominantly white students, was Ferguson. And once Ferguson happened, all of a sudden, it was the topic of everybody's lips. Previous to that time, it was very difficult to talk about race. It was very difficult to talk about slavery, which, as my friend said, this is the origins of this. Once they could say, wait a minute, that's not right. I saw that on the video. They were really killing that guy. Then for the first time, they could say, you know, maybe there's something here. It also caused more anxiety, more depression, more sometimes arguments between people. But it was a great awakening, as was, of course, Obama's election. Now, as they mentioned, as Reverend Swan mentioned, the new regime, which came to power, I believe, basically as hatred to Obama, that's making them even more concerned and considerate. So I'm glad about that.
So it's rallying people, you think?
I think, yeah.
All right, thank you very much. We have someone on social media here for us. Tavon Burston says to the panel, I would ask if they believe that white people are the ones to change how racism are viewed or dealt with, or is it a topic to be dealt with by the people who it directly affects? Does that make sense?
So Tavon is my student.
Oh, he's your student.
My former
okay.
student.
Okay.
That was really exciting. So I think to answer his question is that it's something that we all need to embrace. And I know this sounds a little hokey, but the racial race being defined by the hue of your skin is a social construct, right? So we really are a human race, right? So although it sounds a little hokey, it's true. So we do need to work together, right? So these kinds of dialogues are phenomenal because we're putting this conversation out in front of people that has not been had enough. So first of all, that's one way to do it. And also, as I was saying, those of you, including myself, that are white, we cannot stop this conversation until I can look at my sisters that are brown and black skin and say to them that their children are just as safe as mine based on white privilege. It's got to be a conversation we all have.
So, David, how do you give up your white privilege card or leverage it or share it with someone else? How do you do that? Or do you want to do that?
Yeah, I don't know that you have to give it up. I think you have to use it properly, as somebody on social media said. Going back to Paul's comments, and Steve picked up on it, white men talking to white men. That's an issue. I still have friends in Baltimore who I talk to frequently, who pretty much haven't left that lovely segregated, enclave in North Baltimore, where I grew up, where my wife grew up, we all grew up. I escaped it, fortunately, but they didn't. And yet when I talk to them, and they're friends, I talk to them all the time. When I talk to them, and we talk about race, they really believe that they're way beyond any racist, attitudes or feelings.
And that's probably because they're in groups with people who are like-minded like them. Is that what that is?
Yeah, sure. Back and forth, the same thing. And I don't know, to Steve's question or point, I guess, I don't know how they get beyond that. I'm not sure that it's possible. One of the things that I think that is necessary for all of us, like me, is to engage in conversations like healing racism with folks who don't look like us. But also to read history, whoever you brought up history, to read history and to understand what that history is about, and how it's created the kind of racism, feelings of racism, and the reality of racism that we have today.
Now, we have to go to Twitter. We have someone who has been waiting on social media, Patricia Flowers. Does anyone on the panel or audience think race relations is changing with millennials and younger generations? Any of you can chime in on that. Whoever wants to take it first.
I'd like to say something. I'll address that point, but also I just want to say this, and I have to, because I have to say this.
You got about 5 minutes.
The reality is, I'm sorry to disagree, but my reality is that while we all may be one race biologically, we have to deal with the reality in America that socially and politically, that's not the reality of the way that our country runs. So I think that it's important that we stay grounded in some political and social realities. And of course, we deal with the more esoteric concept of us all being one race. That's wonderful. And that can be something that we continue to work toward. But the reality is that socially and politically, that's not the reality for people of color, right?
So do you think that's changing with millennials, as the person said on Twitter?
Right. So with millennials, I think that maybe on the surface, sure, there are things that are changing, because I believe with every generation there are things that shift. But until we really begin to address the institutional and the systemic racism that exists in this country, and we address the realities of history, which can't be addressed if our institutions are teaching incorrectly. Historically, if we're teaching untruths, then there's no way in the world, if you deal with an untruth, you can never get to a truth.
We got about 4 minutes left, and we have to get to some audience participation. Tell me your name.
Hi, my name is Vanessa Ford from Springfield, born and raised. I have a concern, and it's only because I do have hope for our future and for the idea of racism to shift or to change. And I do have hope for our young people and that they have the power to make the changes necessary to change the reality of today and how racism affects everyone. But I do have a problem with the idea that the press and the media have the ability to reach every corner of our country, and yet they're even afraid to acknowledge racism. And I have a problem with it because they have the power to reach all the social media outlets, and they're repeated over and over again daily, weekly, monthly. But I find that a lot of the reporters are made to feel afraid to acknowledge racism when they see it, to report racism when they know it's happening. And it's very scary to think that our press and our media, who have the power to change the mindset because we're listening to the media daily, but they're even afraid to acknowledge racism when it's right in front of our face. So I would like to ask the panel, and particularly Bishop Swan, how can the media, who has such a power in our country, be afraid to acknowledge and speak about racism and lead us to truth?
Thank you.
Well, the media is infected by racism, just like most other institutions in America. As a matter of fact, they're part of the reason why racism was affirmed in many folks is because, like what you said, you hadn't seen a black person until you went to college. I went to University of Massachusetts. There were some students there from Vermont and Maine who had never seen a black person until they stepped foot on that campus. And their only idea about who we were was what they saw through the media. And so the media has not been helpful in this conversation about race. And I mean, when we think about it, it's embedded in something y'all president said the other day. He said he's the least racist person. Now, I don't know who answers the question about racism by, if I asked you, were you racist? And you didn't think you were, you say, no, I'm not racist. No one says I'm the least racist. I'm less racist than you are. But we got a problem.
We have 2 minutes.
Go right
I
ahead.
just want to make sure that this gentleman gets a chance to speak. Tell us your name very quickly.
Rod Anderson, the Springfield Institute. I just wanted to follow up on a point that Dave, I believe, made with regards to white allies and using your white privilege to actually help folks and create alliances across the board, because that's ultimately how you're going to address a lot of these basic and fundamental issues, right? If you can't create strong alliances, open, honest dialogues, and move things forward, especially along the lines of economics and economic access, educational access, then there's no way we're going to address these issues. That's basically what I wanted to say, and there's a lot more, but I don't want to take up too much time.
All right, thank you very much. Very quickly, we just have about a minute left. Tell us your name very quickly.
I'm Ron Johnson with the Martin Luther King Jr. Family Services.
Yes.
This is really more about what we can do, because we know the condition. So I think about the teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King. What are the strategies that he employed that can be utilized today? There are many teachings, And I'd just like for the panel to perhaps conclude this by embracing the thought that Dr. King's teachers can, in fact, be a pathway towards greater understanding.
Thank you very much.
I think we've got a great example on the panel right now. Dave, when he started Leadership Pioneer Valley, was very deliberate.
We have about 30 seconds.
About going and bringing people onto the board and into that organization from every walk of life. He was very deliberate about that. And I think we have to be deliberate about creating dialogue and changing the face of our institutions.
Being deliberate, just like we have been tonight. And thank you so much for joining us tonight for Healing Racism, a Community Dialogue. A special thank you to all of our panelists who have been fantastic, our live studio audience here, our live guests, and you at home for engaging us on social media and on YouTube. I'm Tina Martin. Have a great night and take good care. You're watching WGBY.
Healing Racism, a Community Dialogue is brought to you by the contributing viewers of WGBY and by
the Beveridge Family Foundation.
We have to make a change for ourselves. Or when this killing is done, all we're gonna do is change hands.
We must destroy that madman before he destroys us.
Would you like to come in for all time's sake?